this evening's committee meetings. Tonight we're going to start with the Administration Committee, but first we will do roll call. Madam Clerk?
Schultz.
Here.
DeBoer.
Here.
Cruz.
Here.
Harding.
Here.
Ganfield.
Here.
Byers.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
All members present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, and this evening, as I said, we're going to start off with the Administration Committee, and we will have a presentation from Mr. Mayor about City Council meeting procedures. So, Mayor Green, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair. And this is a continuation of a discussion we'd had about a month ago. And in this time period, we've had the city clerk has had the opportunity to make the changes that you requested to the document, the council meeting procedures that was available in your administrative committee packet. I'm before you because I have two additional change requests that I've included inside the memo for this council packet. The first one is I would like to propose renaming the standing committees just to match what the departments are. My understanding is that was the intent originally years ago when they created the committees, was to have them match. So I would just ask that, as you see in that memo, that the Administration Committee become the Finance, Business Operations, and Public Safety Committee. The Community Relations and Planning Committee becomes Community Development Committee, and then the Public Works Committee would remain the same. And part of that change, I would also offer the opportunity for council to discuss. Since Finance and Business Operations is one department and Public Safety is a separate department, I know there were some political concerns about bringing forward a new committee for Public Safety at this time, and that maybe the council thought it made more sense just to keep it underneath Admin Committee. But I would I'll open that up for a discussion if you would like to discuss that. I see no concerns about having a Public Safety Committee now that the council rules are going to establish how referrals can go to that committee. And I think we all appreciate now that the standing committees are recommending bodies only. So I think that the concerns about a Public Safety Committee possibly kind of going rogue or going off on a tangent would be protected by our own rules. So that's open for consideration. Also, the second part is I just added in a paragraph about written communications and how to file that with the city clerk. We talk about that during the meetings, during public hearings, but it's not really clear about how a public member would go about that. So I just put that right into the rules. And that's really it. Everything else was just as requested by the council, and look forward to hopefully seeing that approved in this next council meeting. And also I just want to thank the committee very much for being willing to consider these changes. As a mayor, it's going to make my job easier looking through all of these rules, and I hope it'll make your job easier, and plus for the public to make it a much more user-friendly document without jargon. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Green. Unless somebody has a more formal way to approach this, I'm open for that suggestion, but otherwise we can open it to council discussion on this matter.
Take it topic by topic, maybe. Start with the easy one, the second topic of adding in how to do written communications. I'm okay with that.
I'd be in agreement with that. Helps our public be more participatory. Likewise, I think that's fine to clarify.
Any other comments or concerns about that matter? Okay, so we have consensus to move forward, it sounds like, with that. Then the second topic of renaming the committee, the names of the committee, the titles. Any concern with that?
I have a concern with it. I find it somewhat confusing, and I think it would be easier to just leave them as they are.
Any other?
I guess I'd push back just a little bit. I think one of the original intents of having the committees is to allow the opportunity for council members to get a little more in-depth experience and to get a little more in the weeds in the topic at hand. And then for the public reaching out to us as well to know who is over each area, it would be helpful to match up directly. So I would be inclined to be more in favor of having 4, as we have departments, 4 committees to match with those departments exactly. According to Mayor Green's alternative suggestion, we could have then also a Public Safety Committee along with the Finance Business Operations Committee and the Community Development Committee as those 3 changes. Food for thought.
Say that again, Dustin. You want distinctive
There'd be
Committees?
4 committees to match the 4 departments in that proposal, yep.
So instead of, if I just, because I'm thinking so we're all on the same page, instead of having administration be the title of finance, business operations, and public safety, the administration committee, Councilman Gamfield's proposal, and that was also brought up, suggested by the mayor, is to have administration be finance and business operations, and then have a 4th committee called public safety.
Correct.
Correct.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I kind of will echo what Dustin said. The way my brain sees it, and I know everybody's brain is different, so I respect that people see it different ways, is that the committees should line up with each category within the city. So if we have these committees, we have Public Works, it just makes sense. Well, that's all Public Works. Stuff goes to Public Works, community to community, and so forth. So I tend to see it that way. It seems easier. It seems more streamlined. It seems like it just makes sense. So I would echo what Councilmember Ganfield said and be okay with approaching it that way.
A question for attorney. Don't we have something in our union contract about grievances having to go to the administration committee?
No, but the personnel policies say employee grievances go to the administration committee, so that'd have to be adjusted if council goes along with these changes. I'm not sure about the union. They might. I'd have to look. Jennifer thinks they also do. And so we wouldn't be able to change that aspect. We'd have to account for those grievances going to the administration committee, which may mean 5 committees.
I have a question.
Wouldn't we need to know, because we can't just change the union contract, whether it's in both before we would move forward?
Right, that we would have to negotiate changes to the union contract.
Yes, Councilman Harding.
So, and that's a good point. So if it says that, obviously we can't change it. But I would take the ball a little further and wonder what your thoughts are about maybe us having a conversation about taking grievances out of a committee that is comprised of the council members. I know that's a separate topic, but if we're going to look at that, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not common practice within cities to send it there, is it?
Correct. Very uncommon practice. Personnel policies in that regard could be changed rather easily. The union contract could not. We would have to negotiate that change.
So something to look for in the future.
Well, we have a multi-year contract now, so it wouldn't be open till what year? 5 years?
2027?
Okay, so what if, just to kind of bring it back in, and obviously we can have further conversation, but what about just this simple change of the original proposal that's written in front of us of administration being, finance, public operation, business operations and public safety, and so on, minus making another committee to be just public safety. Is there conversation with concern, additional conversation with that proposal?
Madam Chair.
We couldn't rename it based off contract.
We can't do even the administration to finance, operations, and public safety? Oh.
Because then we wouldn't have an administrative committee, correct?
Right.
Even by name.
Okay. Okay, yes, Councilman Cruz.
I guess I was just doing an observation here, or kind of comment on observation. We're expanding the administration title potentially, like we hit a roadblock, to say finance, business operations, public safety. Community relations and planning, we're consolidating to a concise name. That seems like one way we're expanding, one way we're contracting. Why not just keep community relations and planning, and then we resolve the admin situation in the future?
Are we really, though, expanding, or are we just changing the name to reflect? Is anything really, and I guess I'm asking, it's just simply changing the name, the what's under these committees is going to remain the same.
Correct. It would just be a consistency between the sides, because
Right.
if we continue with the names we have today, the Community Relations and Planning Committee helps with the Community Development Department. How about it's Community Development helps with Community Development? Same way with the admin, but obviously with the concern with the contract negotiations, when could we get an answer on that roadblock as far as a potential rename of the admin committee? Would that be, Kevin, is that something you'd speak to?
I can. It depends upon the attitude of the bargaining unit, if they want to discuss renaming the committee that to go to. So, what I'm saying is I can't predict when they would be amenable, if they would be amenable to the change.
Yeah. I think I just want to reiterate, for consistency's sake and ease of citizen input and interaction with council members, I would still like to see those direct correlations to the departments. Even if there was a mismatch in the name of the admin committee to oversee the finance and business operations department, would there be agreement that we would function in that way until we could determine whether or not we can rename the admin committee?
So
Yes, Councilman Hardy.
in other words, just change the community development to community development from community relations, and then keep admin. That's,
Yeah, because you still have the complexity of grievances being reported to the admin committee, even though there's a public safety committee, so that we wouldn't want to introduce at that point.
the other option, which is probably a long shot based off of our track record, is to just make the 4 committees and then add the 5th, like Kevin said, and have an admin committee. So we would still have an admin committee that would only hear grievances for now, and then we would have the 4 committees that show each of the departments, which I would be completely fine with because I don't mind large changes.
I think I'd be on board with that as well. It's all 7 of us anyway. We're here in the standing committee meetings anyway, and it gives granularity and clearer understanding for participants. I like it. 5
That's-
committees? Is that?
I'm okay with it.
Okay, any further thoughts on that comment? Yes, Councilman
I
Cruz?
was waiting for somebody else to say something down there, but I guess, Kevin, if you could explain a little bit then, right now we have administration kind of as an umbrella. And we're proposing to go to 5, so public safety branches off separately. And then admin for the grievances is just pulled off as well. It's not even listed as a topic, but what does it take to implement that? How long, years, negotiating a contract? What do you know, if we got 5 years before we have another contract, am I missing something here?
If we keep administration committee, which exists right now, then it would be not a problem. So if you're addressing what was just raised, then if we had the 4 committees to match each department, and then plus the administration committee, be no problem with the bargaining unit.
Because admin just stays where it is, and we pull everything else out of it.
Right, and I don't know this intimately as the mayor does, but I know that there was, at one time, we had the idea of sort of extraordinary, doesn't really fit committee, would go to the admin committee. Committee of the whole, sorry. So, yeah, I think admin committee, if it's kept, would be very, very limited to those things that are required to go to the admin committee.
Which are?
All I know of is bargaining unit grievances and employee grievances under personnel policies. Those are the only ones that we've discussed, that I'm aware of off the top of my head.
And not for nothing, I'm just wanting to double check a quick thing, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
The copy of the collective bargaining agreement we have, is this current, that I have on my desk today? I just did a quick skim, so I did not peruse it, but I found that it was arbitration and things of that nature would go to the department director. I didn't see admin committee named on a quick glance, so.
Like I said, I haven't looked at all the new versions, so I'd want to look at all contracts before I comment. For sure, But I know that's been discussed before. I just don't know in connection with which agreement.
I think I'm still okay with the 5 if that becomes a moot point, because we could still use them for administrative things. And it's still all 7 members present, so.
Councilman Harding?
I was just gonna say really quick that if it turns out that it's not in the collective bargaining agreement, that it could lead to a conversation in the future about possibly hearing grievances elsewhere and changing the personnel policy. So it could be a segue topic. But ultimately, I like having the 5 personally. And it would allow more people to chair committees. Well, there's 6 because there's committee of the whole, which I think is important.
Okay. So I'll kind of weigh in since I am part of this body. I do appreciate the clarification as far as for administration. I don't know that I'm one way or the other. I could go either way, but I do appreciate the, if we don't even change the name, at least having finance, business operations, and public safety, like maybe a parenthesis around what administration committee means for the clarification of the public. So I'm sorry, tell me again what it would be, the finance, business, operations, and public safety, community development, public works, administration. What's the 5th one we keep talking about?
We were separating
Oh, I'm sorry, public
public
safety on
safety.
its own,
Yep.
and then committee of the whole.
Yep.
Thoughts on that, with that clarification, in case anybody wasn't keeping up like me?
Truthfully, I'm just indifferent. I mean, you're just making more heads to this, and we all sit here, we all debate it, the topics. You know, if the public is confused, they read the packet, they read the synopsis that comes from staff. I don't know if it makes a whole lot of difference, truthfully.
Thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts? So I guess we kind of need to get a consensus of who's where. So who is for, I guess, should I start with who's for no change at all?
I'm for
Who's-
no change.
Okay,
I will go with that.
okay. Who is for the change as proposed in this original, what I'll call this little box that's in our packet, the admin change to finance, public, business operations and public safety, community relations and planning change to community development, and public works stays at public works. Who's for that change? And I would say I'm for that change. Change just the simplicity of it. Sometimes I think it's getting a little too complicated, although I appreciate the clarification. I feel like this alone does it. And then any other comments about that?
Can't do that one because
Oh.
because of the admin, because
Okay.
of the, just right now we can't, for
Okay.
sure. We might be able to,
Okay,
but
so take that away. Who's for the change for the, I guess, 6 committees then? So the 3 that are named, and then public safety on its own, admin, and committee of the whole.
I'm for that.
I'm for that.
Yeah, I would say I'm for that pending the validation, but yeah, I'd be in favor of that.
Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, I guess, does that give, I guess I'll go with that.
I'd like to know what Councilman Cyrus thinks, if he has, one way or the other.
Well, here's the thing. Committees are supposed to be subcommittees, and each one of these was supposed to have its own department head. It's still the same group of us. It's 7 of us, so there's actually no subcommittee at all. This is all just committee of the whole with different names, and we discuss everything anyway. And to divide this up, you could just as well just have the committee of the whole, and we'll just discuss anything that comes up. That's all. That's my thought on the whole thing.
I don't disagree with you, Dave. I think what it does is, for me, it helps divide the subjects for the public to know more clarity on what's on the agenda.
That's up to you. I didn't want to get into a debate, but the whole thing is if you don't have subcommittees where they really get into each department, it's just the same stuff. It's the same bite out of the same sandwich, and we're all going to discuss it, and there's 7 of us. So that's just my point. and you can have whatever point you want and think that it's more clarity. But as long as it's put on the agenda and we're all gonna discuss it, everyone in the public will know.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? I guess before we move on, did we get the information we need from that conversation? Okay, all right, so that, I believe, ends this portion of tonight's committee meetings, and we will move on to Community Relations and Planning Committee with Committee Chair Councilman Ganfield. So we'll switch spots.
Madam Chair,
Yes, yes.
there are edits that I'd like to discuss further on some of these points in here that I believe need to be.
Okay, I was under the understanding we already kind of had those, but okay, yep, go ahead.
On item 4.14, limit on remarks, I think there should be a consideration to say that each member shall be allowed to speak till they yield the floor, so that a person is not cut off when they have points they want to continue making, whether it be several staff members or between council members.
Okay, any further thoughts on that? I'm sorry, where did you say?
4.14, page 8.
Oh, okay, 4.14, okay.
I'd
Okay,
have to see
limit
it.
on remarks, each member shall limit remarks to a reasonable length as determined by the presiding officer. Discussion regarding that?
Would it-
Madam Chair?
Would it be clear if we just said, end the sentence after reasonable length?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Or just put the sentence at each member shall limit remarks to a reasonable length? Do we need the part about the yielding?
So is that anything about that new?
No.
Okay, okay. Just,
Well, yielding the floor
no, I know,
is
but it's
new.
not an edit. This is the original text that we're looking at, right?
Right.
Okay, I just want to be clear, because I thought you said it was a edit.
The results here is an edit from what used to say, each council member shall limit his or her remarks to a reasonable length. And then we added, as determined by the presiding officer.
Okay.
That's what it used to say. And I think that we, as elected council members, should have the ability to engage staff at whatever length we need to discuss a topic in depth. And that's what we're elected to do.
Okay,
So I don't know that we should be limited in any,
okay,
if we get frivolous or that, then other people call point of order or something like that.
okay.
Or
Yes, Councilman
Sure.
Harding.
I think it's the presiding officer's meeting anyway, so he can, I think that's kind of a redundant statement, not that's bad, but if the presiding officer chooses to call you out of order for talking too long, then unless it's overruled by council, you're cut off. So it's kind of like whether the language is in there or it's not in there, it's still the presiding officer's meeting, so.
Yeah, to that point, Madam Chair, it is covered in 15 and 16, so I'm okay with removing the as determined by presiding officer language. It's still in there that they still have the control.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes?
Isn't it in Robert's rules about yielding the floor? Isn't that what we follow?
I think,
And then this is a change?
I think that's what we were just.
When not-
talking-
Right, it's either we follow Robert's rules or looks like to me we follow Robert's rules, but then we tweak it to whatever we want. I mean, that's what it looks like they're doing. Because I think you have the floor until you yield the floor, I believe.
I believe it's also the presiding officer's place to call your time, I guess, if they so choose. And as Councilman Harding just said, then the rest of the body has a chance to overrule that. Am I correct, Mr. Mayor? Okay. Okay, well, either way, if the concern is having the as determined by presiding officer, my remark is it's in the rules no matter what, if it's in there or not, so I guess I'm okay with that not being there if that's a concern.
Me too. Strike it
fine.
as Daryl says.
Okay,
That's fine with me.
Yeah.
looks like,
But are we adding yield the floor language? Because I'm following what federal legislators do. They're allowed to speak, I think 15 minutes, whatever their rules are, and then they say yield the floor. And I think that's a good policy. It works at the federal level. Why wouldn't it work here? And then to Dustin's point, 4.15 and 4.16 speak to the presiding officer's right to enter the discussion. So it's a minor tweak, but I think that's important that as
Fine with
elected
me.
officials, we can keep speaking.
I'm okay with it. I just want to make sure that any law is only as good as the enforcement of the law. It becomes an encumbrance on us to have to yield the floor every time we're done speaking. So, I mean, a parliamentary procedure is very parliamentary.
Madam Chair, I want to clarify the statement about federal Congress. When the members finish speaking and they say yield the floor, they yield the rest of their time. There's a lot of time for each subject. And if they have time left over, they'll yield it to a colleague. It's not that they're deciding they're done and I now yield. So it's not quite apples to apples.
And
Yes.
since the question was up, I didn't see a yield the floor or how that ties in for reasonable length of time. I'm not concerned about it. It's not been a problem. So it might be a solution in search of an issue. So I'm fine with dropping it for now. And then we can address it later if it comes up.
That's fine.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. So to my response to Councilman Cruz is, I don't know that that's been I feel like, in my opinion, just dropping the as determined by the presiding officer and keeping the each member shall limit remarks to a reasonable length of time, or length as determined, length. I'm okay with that. The rest of it about yielding the floor, I'm not for that. Is anybody else for that being added?
But as long as they get their questions done, I guess I'm not 100% understanding the yield part, but I don't want a speaker cut off.
I don't necessarily either, but I do feel like there is a point to having the control of the presiding officer to keep the meeting moving and under control. I don't feel like there's many times at all, at least in the past couple of years, where we've, cut somebody off. But I feel like there are times where we do need to keep moving, and I do appreciate that power of the presiding officer, and I also appreciate the power of the council to overrule that if so needed, or if they so choose. Anyone else have any other comments?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
what if we said, instead of yield the floor, say no further comments? I know it's a little bit of in the weeds possibly, but I feel that there have been times when some of us have been cut off when we weren't ready to be we weren't finished with our questions.
Well,
Anybody else have a
I
comment
should
on
note
that?
too, for 417, it says, closing debate, discussion, including public participation, shall be closed on any item by the presiding officer with the concurrence of a majority of members. Except as provided for in Rule 5.8, a call for a vote shall not close discussion. If any member or the council wishes to be heard, or the presiding officer determines that continued participation of the public will be helpful to the council. So there is that option, basically the council majority to close, and I tend to do that through a consensus. But yeah, there is a time to Madam Chair's point, we have to keep moving forward. And so if the same point is brought up over and over again, I do tend to say, okay, I think we've heard those sides, let's move on.
So, Councilman Cruz, to the comment you just made, I guess my thought is if you weren't done talking and no one had a problem with you, the person who's talking, to continue talking, do we really need you to say no further comments or whatever after you're done talking? The point of this is to, if needed, to maybe establish the reasonable length of time to the speaker if so needed. So I'm confused why you would need to say no further comments.
Well, I can think of situations where some of us are speaking and going down a line of thought, and then we're not allowed to continue that line of thought with a further question, and Mr. Mayor then goes to other council members, though, as he stated, we do come back and get the final go at whatever the topic is. So I guess reasonable length is fine. I'm fine with that as long as we then drop off as determined by the presiding officer.
Okay. Any other comments about that matter? No? Okay. Any further concerns in this section of our committee meeting?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
8.2, council referrals presented in writing. I have a big concern with that, particularly when it states that it has to be in the Monday before the regular council meeting, so that's a week ahead of time. And current practice is to allow council members to petition and ask for a topic to be on the agenda. So I think what this is describing is that action. I think as an elected official, we should have wide latitude to bring forward topics as we see and feel are pertinent. That this 8.2 was an entire sentence that was added. It wasn't in there before, as far as I understand. Maybe the numbering was there, but that topic, I believe we should pull out the requirement to be presented in writing and just do as we do now with gentleman's agreement or general
Point of
people's
order.
agreement.
We've already talked about all of this, and this is what we came up with. So it's like we're just rehashing and having the same thing that we had last time. So I would say let's move on.
Okay. Yeah, that's why I was kind of, tonight I think was mainly to talk about those two additional things. Am I wrong in thinking that?
Madam Chair.
Yes. Yes, Councilman Cruz.
The point here was to put in writing the discussion that we had. We could then further comment, and these are words that I heard from staff, that we'd get another bite at the apple to discuss all these topics. Nothing was cut and dried in this until after our discussion tonight. Putting a referral in writing is an encumbrance on the process of governing if we're not allowed unless it's exigent, which if you look it up, it just says pressing matters. So anything a council member brings up can be pressing matters generically. So I still believe this should be removed, that we have to have it in writing because it doesn't really accomplish anything. You can petition to get a topic on the agenda. That's what this describes.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilman Sires.
I agree with Councilman Cruz. I think this limits us, and when we bring up a council referral, it's for the other council people to think about it as well at the same time, and then we move forward with it from there. If they want to shoot it down at that point and say, no, that's not worthy, I think that's the time to do it. It's just a thing between council people. We bring up a referral, the other council people look at it and go, yeah, let's look into that deeper, let's move ahead, or let's not. But that's where it needs to kind of be clear that we have the freedom to go ahead and bring up a referral at that time at a council meeting so all the other council people can hear it. That's all.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
as a compromise to get this resolved, what if we just took the word shall and replaced it with the word may? So that if you want to send something in writing, you can, but it's not mandatory. That way it satisfies both needs.
I can agree to that.
Likewise.
Okay. Yes, Councilman Harding.
I was going to say I can agree to that only because we have, no matter what, you still have 5 council members. If you bring up a referral and you don't put it in writing, if the council members want to hear it, they can still hear it. So it's, again, another moot point based off of the laying out of the rules. So you can say, I have an exigent referral that I would like to be heard on this topic, and the council can say, the presiding officer could say no, and the rest of the council could overrule the presiding officer. So everything we're talking about here is covered if you understand the rules. I'd prefer to just leave them the same because you can still do a referral if the council wants to hear it. It's a protection against hour-long referrals.
Okay,
Madam Chair?
yes,
Just
yes,
a
Councilman
summary.
Ganfield. No,
Yep, just a summary comment. I hopefully can move on pretty quickly here. I think renaming it is okay to that may instead of shall, that's all right. We still have within Robert's rules the ability to request any council member to reduce their motion to writing, and if they can't do that in the moment, then they wouldn't be able to refer that in an exigent circumstance. So we do still have that protection, as Councilman Harding said. I do think it's best practice, if we're thinking about something for an amount of 2-3 weeks, to have it in writing with sufficient information so that we all know what we're talking about. But when council packets come out Wednesday and the public comes to us Thursday with a concern, we're no longer allowed to respond to that if this had to be in 3 days prior. So I'd like to see this exigent circumstances, excuse me, used in each of those circumstances. When a member of the public calls and says, hey, I see this on the agenda, what are you going to do about it? Sorry, I can't do anything for 3 weeks, is not a good enough response. So as long as we give wide latitude to exigent circumstances as well, I think we're covered either way. So I guess I'm indifferent, but I'm okay with the may, as long as we change the request should contain. So we change 2 words or we leave it as written. I'm okay either way.
okay, I'm gonna say my 2 cents, and then I'll see if anybody else. The reason I believe we wanted it in writing is because these last-minute referrals, this gentleman's or gentlewoman's agreement that we've all talked about the whole time I've been on council, it never seems to come into play or into practice. So I have these last-minute referrals for folks to, think about very quickly, and sometimes I feel like it's almost done purposely to take advantage of I don't even know how to say it, but I think that was the whole purpose of having them in writing and to actually have this gentleman's agreement that we all talk about, but has never really come into play. Obviously, I believe we've had consensus that people wanted to change it to from shall to may, so I believe my opinion is mute. Anybody else have an opinion about that?
Just I wanted to add that it's very helpful to the city clerk if you put it in writing ahead of time, so try to do it if you can.
And also, it's helpful to us, I believe, right? When you come, you may have the best idea in the world, but when you come to us at the last minute where we can hardly think about it, it kind of seems, first of all, it's hard to get all the points across or to think through all the things. And so I guess as a practice for me, and I believe it's been said by other people, unless it's something really, really, really pressing, it'll probably just come practice that if you do that, I will not vote. And that's just, I'll just say no to your referral. So to give us all a level playing ground, unless it truly is emergent, we should be, if we want to be productive and do the right thing, I think we should be doing what was written here, is the thought.
Madam
Yes,
Chair?
Councilman Schultz.
I have a question for Mr. Rogers. If we change the language, I typically see in these going from shall means it's an absolute, should means it's a recommendation, where may, just a language, should we use should or should we use may?
So that's council's decision. I would say that shall is a directive, should is a preference, may, I would add or may not to may. So that, it really isn't a directive. It says you may if you like. If you don't like to, you may not.
And that's why I usually see shall or should.
That's a directive or a preference.
Okay. Councilman Harding?
I have a question. If we're going to change this to you should, are we not just basically eliminating what the rest of it? Unless, I mean, how much do we need the rest of it? You should refer in writing. We don't need this stuff on exigent. That was kind of my point, was that if you believe your matter is pressing and exigent, you can still, even if it's not about the meeting, you could still bring it up and the council or the presiding officer would decide. If we just say you should, then we don't need anything below it because we can continue to function the way we're functioning.
I like that. Here's the one thing about a referral. It doesn't happen immediately. We don't vote on it and make it an ordinance or anything else. It just puts it out there so that the rest of us can think about it, and then we have a couple weeks to think about it and press it into some sort of an ordinance or send it to a committee or anything else. It isn't pressed upon the people to make a decision and vote that night. It's just that, yeah, we should look into this or this should happen. There's another 2 weeks before another council meeting. And then that's when we would formally look at it, and that's when it would get written up as a formal thing. It's nothing that would be pressing that night. You know, if somebody came at the public forum and said, hey, I'd like to do this or that, and then when it comes down to council referral, we can say, hey, you know, these guys brought up something that was quite good. Let's go ahead and look at doing this or that. That's all we're trying to do. We're trying to be good government, and to go ahead and say, you need to have something in writing and it has to be 2 weeks ahead of time or whatever it is, we got to flow a little bit. If government flows, it's good for all the people.
But what you just said is what's written right now.
No, it says that we have to have something in writing.
Unless it's pressing, exigent.
I didn't say that.
But that's what it says in the rules.
Doesn't say pressing here.
It says exigent, which means pressing. So maybe we should just change that fancy word to pressing.
Well, let's just leave it to flow. Because when you start to go ahead and say, the council can't do this or the council can't do that, it ties the hands not only of us, but the people we represent. That's all I'm after.
Okay, I think that we need to probably move forward. We have quite a bit more to cover before 7 o'clock. So thoughts on this matter? So I guess, is there consensus to leave it as it is? Who is for leaving it as it is?
I am.
Hands? Okay, and who is for the change, I believe, to, is it may or?
May not.
Okay, may or may not. Who's for that?
No, I wasn't advocating to add may not. I just meant the meaning of may is you may or may not. Sorry about that.
I just added it.
I'm for should.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, all right.
I could go with should as well, but I
okay.
could also go with may. Who could go with should?
Okay,
Peter was fine with me.
okay, so
Peter's fine with me.
All
it
right.
looks like there's a consensus for
on
should.
All right.
Okay, any other concerns here? And a reminder that we did already talk about these, so I think we are ready to move forward to the next portion of the committee meeting. Am I correct? Okay, Councilman Ganfield will take over this section of the meeting.
All right. You know, while we're at it, we might change just chairing from our own spots next time. We'll see how that flies. All right, well, welcome to the Community Relations and Planning Committee section of our standing committee meeting. Tonight we have a couple presentations, the first of which is a presentation about a Cedar Falls Rotary Memorial Plaza. We have a couple Rotarians to present tonight. I'll give you the floor, sir.
Thank you. And thank you all. My name is Mike Butler. Gail Bonzel is right behind me. And Rotary is turning 100 years old in February of 2024. And to shorten this up a little bit, it was on a cold and snowy night in February of 24, and we still got the job done, or they did. And names like Levitt and Redfern and Searly and Pete and a lot of names through our history have been in Rotary, but we hope to create a path between the Barron's Wrap Station and our little red schoolhouse. And in doing that, where that red circle is, we would create a Rotary Plaza, and the pathway would be a 10-foot, so it'd be wide enough for bicycling. The back side, or what I call the south side of that circle, would have a bench so that kids could sit on it while they're doing their schooling in the summer, or any other group could use it. And we'll talk about them. Right is forward.
Hi there. This is a subsection of a drawing by an art a person that we hope to utilize. This is abstract. Sorry, this is abstract stuff. So not the final design, but it should be close. What'd I do? Just shut it all down, Mike?
I don't think that was you, Mr.
Yep,
Mansell. There we go.
you're good.
There we go. This will give you a little better idea. If you see on the front side edge, which looks to be blocks, that's where the granite benches would be in the semicircle. The bike path would go through the middle. The granite that you see will be a grayish, black polished granite that's 8 foot tall, 5 foot wide, 8 inches thick instead of the normal. The seven, what would you call those? The seven continents, if you would, are represented by the twisted stainless steel that arcs up over the granite. There'd be a plaque there explaining all this. Total height, probably around 14 feet at the top of the top strand. We want to build this thing so it lasts. The flooring on this will be a 2-inch thick granite for the whole area. The area will be somewhere between 40 and 50 foot in diameter. We expect to put footings underneath that granite so it doesn't heave-ho. Wayne McGee's agreed to come on board as general contractor, so we think we're in pretty good hands that way. We've raised some money. We're going to raise some more. We'd like it to look like a little bit of Washington, D.C. type of a memorial when it happens. And again, it's to recognize the essential workers in the pandemic.
And the key thing that I wanted to reiterate, we are not doing this as a cost to the city. We will raise the money. We have raised a good deal of it, so that it will be on us. And of course, we'll lean on some contractors. Hopefully they'll be kind also. But also it is for our essential workers. That is, we don't want to memorialize COVID, but we really want to remember those that were on the front line working. And with your concurrence, yes, a couple of key things. We will avoid any part of the levee. There are 3 trees that may be included, and maybe 2 of them may be needing to be removed. And we'll move some signage, one of which is a picture of my house. I live in Roger Levitt's old house. And this is kind of where we're looking. If we do well now, we would move on to an agreement with the city in writing mid-2022. Maybe even the fall of 22, we would have most of our fundraising in place, project plans finalized, and then come 2023, we would do the construction. And of course, Public Works would keep a close eye on us. And we hope to have that completion in the fall of 23 so that we can have an event that we don't have to worry about the weather. And so our request is that the council move to direct staff to work with the Cedar Falls Rotary on a project agreement for city council consideration. And with that, I take any questions, or I'd be glad to have a motion.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Butler. I would open it up for council questions of understanding to begin with and see if we have any clarity that we need to gain on this topic. Mrs. DeBur.
Mike, it's a beautiful project. You talked about 2 or 3 trees. Is there a chance that we might not have to take any of the trees out?
So far, Marty Holtz is our architect, and we're working with all that. If we do, we'll put them back. But yeah, I'm a bit of a tree hugger, so we'll do what we can to save what we can.
Sure. I echo what Susan is saying. I drove by and take a look at the site, and there's some very, very nice shaped trees right what looks like to be the spot. Replacing them with one as thick as my thumb, that's not my vote. If we can position this so we don't touch those trees that are decades old and add to the ambiance of what's there right now, I'd be for it totally, but just save the trees any way possible.
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Councilman Schultz.
So, I don't want to get in trouble for getting off subject, but I have the same concern. It isn't started yet, but I have concerns about us losing trees when we start work on Main Street. So, I will echo what those folks say. I would ask Mr. Heath, is there a concern from your guys' angle, or things that you would like to see or not like to see from a standpoint?
We really have no concerns with the project. We've had quite a few discussions with Mr. Butler, and I think they've got a lot of their bases covered. We talked about some in-kind assistance through Public Works, as well as inspection services providing some of the inspection support.
Any other council questions for clarity? I would like to open it up to anybody from the public that would like to comment on this, if there's, seeing none there. I would entertain a consensus to make a recommendation. I guess I would like to see the trees, especially those that are of a certain age, not be altered in any way. I hate to give a prohibitive edict, but go ahead, Mr. Goodsall. Yep.
So
Bonsall, sorry.
if you restrict us to not taking any trees down, I'm afraid that the project will suffer, because I've walked it off. I've been out there with tape measures and with the architect and the like. I tell you, I really am a tree guy. If you want, we'll hire Jeff Dirks. We'll get his big tree spade in there and give you whatever you want. And I mean that. I don't care if you want a pine or an oak or what. But if you study the site and study the architect's rendition, you'll lose one tree for sure, and it's that soft maple that's sticking closest to First Street, for sure. Sorry.
Mr.
And
Chair.
there used to be one other tree there that is gone. The stump is quite prevalent.
That could be removed as well. Okay, Councilman Cyrus?
I have pretty good confidence in the Rotarians. I think they'll say what they can and do a good job. I've got no doubt that they'll make it nice and be careful, so.
Okay. Councilman Harding?
I second what Councilmember Cyrus says. I have faith in you guys and doing what's right by the city, so I like the looks of the project. I like how much you guys have put into this already and taken on. And if you, I do worry about the trees, but if I would feel comfortable moving forward with what you've done, and would just like to see that you guys put something back there, and I'd be okay with it.
So can I get a consensus for recommending to staff, or last comment, Susan?
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can get a recommendation to staff, can we recommend, or does this need to go to council to direct you guys to do something with it?
You can recommend to staff so that we know to proceed, or
Perfect.
just refer it to staff to work with them, either way.
So I just love a show of hands for a recommendation that they should save the trees when possible, but they shall replace any trees that were removed. In favor? Perfect. It's unanimous, so city staff has some direction. Thank you, Mr. Butler. Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Appreciate you guys. All right, second item on our Community Relations and Planning Committee agenda tonight is a private shared parking requirements discussion. This has come about by City Council recommendation to hone some of the requirements downtown. So we have Planning and Community Services Manager Karen Howard to present on this item. I'm speaking fast because we're going to try and shrink our window a little bit. So Karen, I think you can probably do the same if you're ready there, ma'am. Almost. Perfect. I see it on our side. If you can drive from that monitor to your right, or are you controlling the presentation?
Karen, I think Denny has it up for you, so he could advance.
Perfect. Thanks to our folks in the control room.
Very good. Good evening, council. So tonight, we just have a few points that were brought up in referral. The first point we're going to discuss is review of off-site shared parking options. I know we've talked about this a number of times, just to run through that. And then review, it was referred to review the on-street parking as shared parking, the allowance for that. And then review the time of day rules for shared parking. So the first slide here is just an overview of the minimum shared parking requirements. As you recall, we have shared parking requirements for upper floor commercial in new buildings. There's a new requirement for that. And there's a shared parking requirement for residential on the upper floors and also in the neighborhood for a multifamily building. So that parking requirement is 0.25 spaces per bedroom. Now, I just want to note that there's no shared parking requirement for non-residential on the first floor. I know there's been some confusion about that. So just upper floor commercial, new buildings, and for residential on the upper floors. So it was referred to talk about the location standards for allowing shared parking. One of the reasons we have this is to provide some flexibility for developers, for property owners. I know there was a concern about shared parking. People had concern about taking their property rights, and so this is really to provide some flexibility for a developer, a property owner, to have some options. They could have the shared parking on their site, or they could have it on a different property within 600 feet walking distance from the project site. This would not be in the neighborhood areas, but just in those main core downtown areas. And also the on-street parking directly abutting the project site can be counted toward that shared parking requirement. Now, I just want to point out that in the previous CBD overlay zones, that these were similar rules for that. So in the previous zoning code, the parking on a separate site was allowed with approval, and the on-street parking counted toward that visitor parking requirement that was in the code. With regard to the time restrictions, the shared parking, if the owner desires to place a time or hour of the day restriction on the shared parking, some people may just have it shared parking all the time. But if they want to put a restriction on it, they have to have it reviewed. It has to be available to the public for at least 12 hours out of the 24-hour period, and at least 8 of those hours must be during business hours or during those peak evening hours. There are no time restrictions allowed in the neighborhood areas of the downtown code. So you have to have that available to visitors at all times in the neighborhoods. So that's just a brief overview of what the rules are. So tonight, really, it's a discussion whether to petition the Planning and Zoning Commission to amend one or more of the time and location rules for the shared parking.
All right, thank you very much, Mrs. Howard. I would open it up to council questions or comments at this time for Mrs. Howard. Councilmember Cruz.
I guess probably in my mind, the easiest discussion would be whether on-street public parking would be attributed to a new development, and I feel that takes away from the public's access of current parking that's there, and would put us in more of a detrimental parking situation if we continued with that in this new code.
Question: if they're allowed, they're only allowed to count the adjacent or the abutting parking spaces of public as shared parking. They're not allowed to count that. They're not allowed to park there and utilize that as their own private parking, correct?
That's correct.
So it doesn't really change anything from what's currently happening or what was happening before.
Yes, that's correct.
Thanks.
Councilman DeBoer.
It seems it's not quite fair to the business or the property that does not have abutting property. For example, the Main Street, there's some properties that have parking and places where it doesn't. So how do you counter that inequity?
I think it's based on every property is going to be different, and they're going to have different characteristics. So I think the idea is the parking is supposed to be shared parking. So if you happen to have on-street parking next to your property, you would be able to count that just like you used to be able to count it as visitor parking. The property has the certain characteristics. Some properties may be larger and able to accommodate all the shared parking on their site. Some really tiny sites may have real restrictions on where they can locate shared parking.
Personally, I don't feel it's appropriate to have to count public parking as your required shared parking. I'd like to see that whole sentence taken out.
I agree.
I'm confused on that issue. I'm just visually thinking, like Tony's doesn't have on-street parking at the front side of their restaurant. Can they count the abutting public parking on Main Street within 600 feet as their shared parking if they were a new business? Or do those not count because they're not directly abutting?
So this would be for just brand-new projects on a
Right.
new property. So
I'm
it
just
wouldn't be for any
visualizing that.
existing businesses, yeah. So
If
if
we
that
had
was,
another one
if
where-
that whole building burned down and they built a new building there, they would be able to count anything that's out in front of their property as shared parking. Otherwise, they have to find another location for their shared parking, either on the site or an abutting property within walking distance of their site.
And just verifying that within walking distance site, can they claim public parking as their shared parking?
No.
Just like the business owner that's on Main Street with parking diagonals?
Not the public on-street parking.
So
They
to
could make
Susan-
an arrangement, say there is a next-door neighbor that has extra parking, say in the evening, they could come up with an arrangement with that property owner. Maybe they lease some parking spaces, those get to count toward their shared parking.
But to Susan's point, though, you would have some on Main Street that have the opportunity, should they redevelop, to use public parking that's directly in front of their storefront, and others that will not have that opportunity. They will have to purchase land from someone else or lease land from someone else to accommodate this required shared parking, correct?
Or put it on their own property, yes, yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Cyrus?
Isn't that parking owned by the city, and don't we remove the snow and take care of it and do the maintenance on it? I just don't understand how you can give that over and call it shared parking to a new building. Just doesn't make any sense. It's owned by the city, is it not?
I think the idea behind, and I think for the previous ordinance as well, was that it's supposed to be public parking, so it's the most accessible for the public. So if you happen to have some public parking right out front, then that can count toward your shared parking. I think that's the way it was viewed previously, and so we just continued that with this new ordinance.
But it is owned by the city, is my
Yes,
point.
that's correct.
Councilor DeBoer, go ahead.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So I know I'm repeating myself, but first, this is only for new development, or like you just said, if the whole building burnt down, is it still new development, or if it's not changed, like the footprint's not changed, is it considered new development?
Yeah, it would be new development, and it would just be for upper floor
Okay.
uses.
So God forbid the building burn down, which we know can happen. But also we need to remember that these businesses, I know we hear from the folks, or we've heard loud from some of the folks that are against this, but there's also many people who are for this because, again, they like the characteristic of a downtown district. So if a business didn't like the rules of the downtown character district, then maybe they would consider not coming and establishing their business in the downtown character district. I don't have a concern with any, do not want to take anything to planning and zoning. I like it how it is. We've kicked it back to them several times. And so I guess I just want us to remember that you don't have to have a business in downtown Cedar Falls. You choose to have a business in downtown Cedar Falls. And again, although I know there's the side that says there's not enough parking, there are many of us who don't see a parking problem. My husband and I went out to dinner the other night for our anniversary. We parked in the shared parking lot at Viking Pump, and we had a lovely walk all up and down downtown Cedar Falls and got to say hi to our neighbors. So please think of it that way as well. This isn't a major concern for everyone in our community. We keep not moving forward. We have other things to talk about. So those are my thoughts on that subject.
Councilman Harding?
So I don't feel like we need to refer this to planning and zoning personally, based off of multiple facts. One, it's pretty much continuation of what's already been there. Two, it's only for new development. Three, it only counts for upper floor and residential. It doesn't count for if someone put a business like Tony's. If you rebuilt Tony's and it was just Tony's and he didn't have stuff above, he wouldn't need to put in any parking anyway. So, and four, based off the lots that I've studied that would be able to be developed in the future, I think that I'm okay with the way it is written currently, and I don't see a need to send it on. So I'm good with leaving it as it is.
Others don't have questions. If I may, Karen, I'm wondering, what are you hearing from developers? I mean, obviously, this is a recent change, but what are you hearing from developers, large and small, praise for the new system? Like it, don't like it? What are you hearing from them?
Well, there hasn't been a lot of development that's occurred so far, but for the projects that people are working on, I know that there are some tight sites, and that's one of the issues with developing in an existing downtown, is this does provide some flexibility for a project to get going. So it could be that if we make these rules tighter, it could mean that we might not see some projects that we otherwise might see downtown. So you, of course, can do your own research on that, but and it's up for debate, of course. But they are pretty tight sites.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Cruz?
The comments about there's only limited sites to develop, you have to realize that anything that's not established as a historical building can be tore down and made into a multi-story, multi-use building. And then they're going to say that the parking right in front of it, like say you tear this down, it's no longer a community center. You go 4 stories high, put a restaurant in here that's going to seat 300, 400 people in this size of a place, and you're saying this parking along the street here is attributed to this building alone, taking away from customers coming to this restaurant.
Point of order. You don't have to build any parking spots for a down first floor commercial. So
I specified you build up 4 stories tall, and for the residential component of a new structure built on an existing site that they tear down, there's going to be the requirement for a quarter spot per bedroom on mixed use and multi-use. There's lots and lots of sites that can be tore down that are not historic. The historic buildings are protected. So if you look at what's available according to the parking study, it's approximately 680 street parking spots from the river over to Franklin and from 1st Street to 7th Street. And that area has 685 roughly on-street parking spots. There's already 4,000 restaurant capacity seating in the bars and restaurants. And I've said this before, if you have half the seats filled and everybody comes 2 in a car, that's still 1,000 cars. And now you're saying that the residents, the developers that build more residential units, which they want to do, are going to be allowed to take the street parking and count it for their structure. That's taking away from you and I going downtown, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. 685 goes all the way to Franklin. How many people in here parked over on Franklin to come to this meeting? Okay.
I didn't have to because there's parking right over here.
Right, because wait till it's gone. Now, 600 feet, that would be behind Casey's over here. How many people park behind Casey's to park here? Now, when this is full and a thriving restaurant going here, the residents are going to fill up the spots next to us because they can, and there's not enough allocated spots for them. So this is critical. To say that it was allowed in the past is validating that, I should say it's not validating the fact that when I'm door knocking and people talk to me after meetings like this, they say that we don't come downtown anymore because there's no parking, particularly Thursday nights to some extent, but Friday and Saturday nights, the prime time to come to all the restaurants and bars, there's not enough parking. And you make it worse by adding more residential, and we don't have enough street parking as it is, and you're going to allocate some of that to the shared parking. I think that's a disaster. It's just going to ruin the downtown, ruin the established restaurants. That's why I did this referral, because you can't stretch 685 spots continuously. Residents need their parking spots. If not the residents, the bar owners, restaurant owners, retail shop owners, the managers of those shops, the employees for those shops, and wait staff, they have to park somewhere. That's before the customers arrive. They have to be somewhere. So, and they don't all park 600 feet away because they're late for work. They come 1 car per person. You look at most any good-sized restaurant here, it'll take 20 up to 30 people to run the operation. And I've asked a number of them. So It's critical that we adjust these standards. We don't need to overbuild the downtown. I think it's functioning very well as it is. We win awards all over the country, really all over the country. And so why ruin it? Why overcrowd it? We don't have mass transit. We can't bicycle in the middle of the wintertime. Rainy days, we don't have the criteria that this form-based zoning is predicated on in our community to make something like this crowded parking work. So,
Yeah. Councilmember Schultz?
So Karen, for some clarity, planning and zoning, this is against what planning and zoning already set, right? In the
Right, we
form-based.
have the ordinance in place already, and this is what's in the ordinance already.
And the ordinance came from planning and zoning.
Right.
And, you know, there is a lot of good things happening downtown. And I don't have a crystal ball, but I do have some inkling that we're gonna end up with some parking from a parking ramp at some point in my lifetime. If we like it or not, or if how it's gonna go. Hopefully, it's gonna be something that's very attractive, but I think that's gonna be what's gonna happen. I'm for the work that planning and zoning has done, and I'll back that.
Okay. So I know we've deliberated on requirements for shared parking. We've taken planning and zoning's recommendations in the past, and we've stuck with that number. Tonight, we were talking specifically about time and location rules. Is there anything that we want to change from that? I've heard some that want to leave it as is and move it on. I'm hearing obviously an overall consensus in some fashion, but I'd like to hear what specifics we would like to move forward, or do we need to continue this discussion? I'd rather
Councilmember
we get an
Canfield.
answer.
I mean, I think the discussion is, do we want to send any of this back to planning and zoning or not? And so I think obviously there are some people that do and some people that don't. Either way, I don't really want to send it back. So I'm okay with what they decided the first time. So I think we just need to find out who wants to send it back and maybe not debate the merits of what we want to personally see.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Councilman Cyrus.
I agree with Councilman Cruz, but also this 600 feet is quite a distance. That's 2 football field lengths. If you have to carry your groceries and that kind of thing, 2 football field lengths, I think that's an exorbitant distance for somebody to carry their groceries and those kinds of things. I think that needs to be much closer. I think it should be within 100 feet. But 600 feet is unacceptable. And the on-street parking is counting when it's owned by the city and has been for the last, 100 years. I don't think that should be counted toward private business. So those are my only 2 things, what I feel.
Chairman, I would like to just clarify one point. The shared parking is for the public, so it's not the reserved parking for the people that live in the building. It is for anybody. So if they count the on-street parking toward their shared parking count, that doesn't mean that that building just only exclusively gets to use it. It still is public parking. And any shared parking within 600 feet of the building is also shared parking for the whole public.
No, and my very point is that those are already shared parking, and to count that toward a building is insane. That's my pure point. It's already shared parking for everyone because we all own those spots. So the 600 feet, that's a long distance. So I'd like it to be closer, and I'd like the shared parking as it's owned by the city. I don't think that should count.
What's recommendation for the distance then? Are we talking on-site only?
Yes.
adjacent was what the language, my understanding in the past.
Wasn't it contiguous before? It had to be attached or contiguous property. It couldn't be two lots down. It had to actually touch the property.
I think the language in the code previously was very general. It said may be located off-site, and there wasn't any distance mentioned at all. It just had to be reviewed, and you'd have to come up with an agreement about that parking and the location. So it had to be approved as reasonable. So there wasn't a lot of specificity in the ordinance.
I would beg to differ. I think it said contingent or something to that effect.
It may have in the previous, said contiguous and meaning adjacent as well, but I'm with Councilmember Dunn. I think those that are wanting to build here, if they know this is the requirement, they're going to choose whether they're going to build down here and can accommodate parking. I don't want to have no parking added. The shared parking was an idea to add parking for public use, and if we're just claiming the on-street parking, it's not adding any parking. It's exacerbating or kicking the can down the road. So I'd like to see it required as well, but I guess I'd be amenable to the language of no more than 100 feet or 200 feet. That puts it more contiguous. Councilman Harding.
My only point was that we are talking about things that we don't have control over, because we either have to make a decision to send this back to planning and zoning or keep it here. So if the consensus is to send it back to planning and zoning, then they're going to send something back to us. And so us saying we want it to be this or that, it's all moot. It doesn't matter. We either A, want to send it back and hear what they have to say, or B, we want to leave it as is. So I think us discussing the details.
I think the only benefit to discussing the details is to tell them, here's what we're looking for. Are you guys in agreement with that? I know that that is a little bit superseding the expertise of those volunteers, and I'm not trying to step on their toes, but if we were to have a consensus to say, we want you to investigate this specific, that'd be the only reason we'd put numbers on it to send back to them. Of course, we always have the reserved right to supersede them with a majority from council. So,
Mr. Chairman,
Councilman Cyrus.
I just have a question for Karen. Who came up with these first numbers, the 600 feet and to do the shared parking? Was that completely planning and zoning on their own came up with 600, or was that fed to them and then they said, okay?
So there was a draft ordinance that was prepared with
that
this
was by city
language,
staff?
and then we discussed it with the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
Mr. Chair,
Councilman Cruz.
I think this is not a package deal. I think it's our prerogative to decide certain components of this and break it down into 3 discussions. 1, 2, or 3 can be sent back to planning and zoning. Planning and zoning can change it, comes back to us, we can change it again, they go back to them. That's the process that is set there. The first thing I'd like to discuss is one of the 3 components is the on-street public parking that's allowed to be attributed to a new development. I cannot see taking part of 685 very limited numbers of spots, and that's going all the way to Franklin and 7th Street, and saying that some of that could be attributed to new residential. I think that component doesn't fly. That's a lead balloon. And I think we discuss that first. Then we go to the off-street 600 feet away and decide what we want to do with that. If we want to shrink it down to contingent, 100 feet, some fashion. And then we can talk about time of day, which I'd like to throw out there. From midnight to 6 a.m. would be off limits. That's not a time when shared parking would be utilized. So should be during business hours of some fashion, and I'm being pretty generous. It should be 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 8 a.m. But anyway, I'd like to see 3 components here.
So Councilman Harding first.
So again, I agree with what the first part of Council Member Cruz's statement. It's for us to throw back to planning and zoning, and they can bring it forward, and we can talk about it and throw it back. So we just need a consensus on who wants to send it back.
I do.
Yeah, I guess we could summarize in that way. Councilman Schultz, did you have anything to add, or would
That's
you?
where I'm at
prefer-
too.
Okay,
We
perfect.
either don't send it back or we do.
Okay.
So that's the vote, I think, or the consensus.
Sure.
Councilman Ganfield, can I say one last thing? Because I feel like this is so important. As any of us who sit or have sat and to get folks to come and join our committees, let's remember that these folks have poured tons and tons and tons and tons of time into this. So as we're making this vote, this has come from them. This has come from hours upon hours of work from them. So just remember that. It's not like it came out of nowhere. They've done the work. So every time we kind of kick it back, well, it's fine if that's the way the consensus is. That does wear on people when we constantly are second guessing what they've already gave to us. Yeah, I agree. We just need to decide whether there's consensus to send it back or not.
In that vein, I will ask for a show of hands on consensus to send this discussion back to planning and zoning again. And I would support that consensus to have this discussion there. I would go so far as to encourage public as well to give them your insights and weigh in on this as well. With that consensus being sent on, we do have a few minutes left to move on to our Public Works Committee. So I will yield the floor to Chairman Schultz.
So what we have on the agenda is the West 12th Street speed limit from Barnett Drive to Union Road. Mr. Wiki, you have 4 minutes to put your 15-minute presentation together.
All right, good evening, Mr. Chair, Council. I do have a bunch to get through, so I'll just jump right into it. This is a discussion for the 12th Street speed limit from Barnett to Union Road. 12th Street is a roadway that has a classification as a minor arterial. As a minor arterial, it means that roadway is meant to provide trips of moderate length to commute across areas of the city that are somewhat free-flowing and unimpeded. The 12th Street's corridor from Barnett to Union Road is fairly open roadway with a park and golf course on the north side and a mix of land uses between agricultural, park, and residential on the south side. Concerning this corridor, we have done several traffic studies in the past, going back to 2007, 2013, 2018, and we're currently out collecting data right now as we speak for a new study. The 2013 study was conducted in the 25-mile-an-hour posted speed zone, while the 2007 and 2018 study was conducted throughout the entire corridor. When we conduct traffic studies for the purpose of speed limits, we are primarily interested in the 85th percentile speed. What that is the 85th percentile speed is the safest speed that 85% of motorists will travel that feels comfortable and safe relative to the roadway conditions. For the 2007 and 2018 studies, we looked at the data collected near the Lexington Heights subdivision where the speed limit is posted at 45 miles an hour. The data from the 2007 study shows that westbound traffic had an 85th percentile speed of 48 miles an hour, while the eastbound had an 85th percentile speed of 49 miles an hour. The 2018 data showed westbound traffic with 85th percentile speed of 47 miles an hour and an eastbound 85th percentile speed of 43 miles an hour. And I would just like to note that that eastbound 85 percentile speed of 43 is below the posted speed limit. So the Federal Highway Administration has conducted a traffic study titled "The Effects of Raising and Lowering Speed Limits on Selected Roadways." And what that study did is it measured speeds of vehicles before and after speed limit changes at 98 different sites in 22 different states. And what that study concluded was that both raising and lowering the speed limit had very little effect on the operating speed of the vehicles, meaning there was a mean difference of percentile speeds that were less than 1 mile per hour. In another study that was conducted by Penn State University and summarized in Science Daily magazine in 2018 showed that setting the speed limit at 5 miles an hour below the 85th percentile speed resulted in the least number of types of crashes, but lowering the speed limit to 10 miles an hour or lower below the 85th percentile speed had a negligible change in the total number of crashes, but of those crashes, there was an increase in the number of injuries and fatalities. This was attributed to a greater variation in the vehicle operating speeds. So for this corridor, our crash data concluded that from 2021 going back 5 years, there's 4 total reported crashes within the last 5 years, and of those, only 1 possible injury was reported. Going back 10 years, from 2021, there's only 6 reported accidents, and out of those 6 accidents, only 2 possible or suspected injuries were reported. So from the last 10 years on this corridor, it's shown to be relatively safe with only a few accidents in that time frame. Typically, when we're looking at data as related to traffic accidents and crashes, we typically look for at least 5 crashes within any single year. And as we've seen in the last 10 years, there's only been 6. When we do undertake these studies, I just would like to state that it takes a lot of resources and a lot of manpower and equipment, and we usually try to do these in-house. but if we have to consult them out, the cost can typically run from anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000. All right, so jumping into how speed limits are really established, and they're set according to the Manual Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the MUTCD. And what the MUTCD states is that speed limits are established by either law, ordinance, regulation, or as adopted by the authorized agency based on an engineering study. Speed studies are conducted that give us a set of data in which that data is used to determine an appropriate posted speed should be given for any corridor that was studied. In addition to that, speed limits should be established within 5 miles an hour of the 85th percentile speed that was studied. Speed zones, the MUTC states that speed zones meaning that a speed zone is a different speed limit other than what the statutory posted speed limit shall be, only can be established based on an engineering study that has been performed in accordance with traffic engineering practices. And this study shall include the analysis of the current speed distribution of free-flowing vehicles. So the MUTCD recognizes or recommends that speed studies should only be conducted when road design changes or when traffic volume fluctuates or when there is an unidentified safety problem, i.e. accidents. So to arbitrarily assign lower speed limits doesn't decrease the number of accidents, but what really happens is you do increase your risk of greater injury or even fatalities. So with that, conducting traffic studies should only be conducted when it's really warranted, and we just don't want to keep doing traffic studies on seems like it's a 5-year rotating basis just for the sake of doing the study. So with that, I'll entertain any questions you may have.
I have a couple to start with, Mr. Wiki.
Sure.
What generated this discussion tonight?
I was told it was going to be on the agenda and prepared to talk about the speed limit on 12th Street.
Okay. Did it come from a citizen group or one or two people?
It come from my supervisor.
Okay. All right. How many crosswalks are there between Hudson Road and Union Road?
There is one recognized designated crosswalk, and it is up in that Lexington Heights area.
At the T intersection?
Yes.
Is it marked? Is there any sort of signage?
There is, it is marked, it is signed as a pedestrian crosswalk.
And if this speed limit would change, is it looking from Hudson Road to Barnett or Barnett to Union?
It would be from Barnett to Union. From Barnett to Carriage Lanes, that's the 35 mile an hour posted limit. And then from Carriage Lane all the way back to Hudson, that's the 25 mile an hour posted limit.
And the concern seems to be the 45 mile an hour.
That seems to be the concern
Section.
that comes up more often than not.
Okay. Director Birdie, what's been the historical, we looked at the 4 crashes in 5 years, 6 crashes in 10 years. Has there been other concerns in that stretch of road?
Well, I would say over my, looking back over my 3 decades, the roadway really hasn't changed with the exception of, housing being added on the south side of the golf course. So, in terms of enforcement or police activity, there really hasn't been, much change except the entryway for Lexington Heights and the entryway for the housing addition just east of it.
I guess, discussion?
Chairman?
Mr. Ganfield?
Mr. Wiki, I'd like to hear your take on why the 85th percentile decreased from 7 to 18.
It could be a varied number of factors. There was nothing that really pinpointed why it decreased. The data just showed that it did.
Is it plausible that because of the additional residences out there, people feel like they should drive slower because there's children present?
I'm sure that's plausible, but like I said, there's nothing that would point to it directly.
Okay.
Mrs. DeBoer?
Is there any traffic calming ideas that we could do other than speed limit that might slow people down?
For this corridor, it's a fairly wide open corridor, so we'd really have to think about what different types of implementing ideas we could possibly use. Off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to venture, what might work, what might not work. We'd have to really think about that and kind of dive into it.
Does it seem that it's volume related as we continue to develop off of Union Road and off of 12th Street?
So the last volume data that we received from the state was in 2017, and I looked back previous to 2017 back to 2009. So the difference in traffic volume from 2009 to 2017 was a very slight increase, not a whole lot had changed. I think it was 2,400 vehicles per day up to 2,500 vehicles per day, which is really not that that many given that time span.
So if there was a change, would you recommend a reduction to 35 or a reduction to 40 based on the 43 mile an hour and the?
If the traffic volumes really significantly increased and we saw that increase, that would warrant a new study. And the new study, based on that data that we collected from that new study, might tell us some information that would, say it's warranted to change the speed limit.
Okay. Mr. Sayers?
I have just a couple questions. What about getting a crosswalk there at the end of Quail Ridge Drive to cut across? Because there's a tremendous amount of kids that live there and then go to that golf course park there. Have we looked into that at all?
We've looked at it cursory. We haven't studied it in depthly, that specific crosswalk. I know we've looked at it and we've talked about it. We would have to do further investigations to.
What about up on Union Road where you have the bicycle trails and they cross there, and there's the one little, on each one of those crosswalks, there's a stop sign. It's actually a yield sign that then flashes red. Could we get those down there on Quail and 12th Street?
So the crosswalk that was installed up on Union Road was done as part of the DOT requirements for that trail project.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what generated that RFB being established at that crosswalk location.
So you then recommend to slow it down to 40 the whole distance, and then could we go out to the end of the city limits there? Because then that would encompass a little bit of the Cherrywood Acre area, and I know a lot of them walk down the side of the street to get to the trails.
If the data would support that, then that could be a possibility.
So you're only looking to slow it 5 miles an hour is what you recommend?
Well, that's typically what the MUCD would recommend, is that you don't want to deviate 5 miles plus or minus from the 85th percentile speed.
Okay, but then we could add on that last little bit, because I think it's only about 1/8 of a mile where it would cross and go west of Union Road there to slow that down as well.
I think I'd probably want to look at that almost separately, have its
Okay.
own little independent study done.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
So, Mr. Wiki, we would, prior to making any changes, would need to have a study according to what's the reference you're using?
The MUTCD, Manual Uniform Traffic Control Devices.
So that would be the requirement or the recommendation?
Right.
Okay.
Yes. They lay out all these certain warrants in that manual that gives you guidance on, recommending a change in a speed limit.
So is that the study that you were referencing you could do internally, or that's a study we'd have to?
We've been doing them internally, but it could also be consulted out as well.
So is that what we want to ask Mr. Wiki to do as a committee?
I want to, I'm sorry, Councilman Schultz, right now, am I wrong? Are you collecting data right now?
We are collecting data right now.
Okay,
for
so
a
we
new
should,
study.
we should maybe wait for the data that's being collected to see if a study's warranted? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, once we collect that data, we'll compile it and we'll put together a report based on that data. And that report will offer recommendations.
Because if changes are made, although the layperson might think that, oh, that seems right, kind of like how we think one-ways are somehow safer, but really data shows the opposite. So if we're not waiting for the data, even though we as citizens might think that it makes sense to slow the traffic, it actually doesn't make it safer. It can make it more dangerous if the data is not showing the change in percentile, or if it's not within the percentile. Is that what I'm understanding?
Right, yes. No,
Okay,
that's,
so at
that's
this
a
point,
risk that you would certainly be taking.
so right now, we're collecting some data, and maybe we should sit back and wait for that data to come before any further recommendations are made. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, we'll compile a report once the data's been collected and we've gone through it.
Okay.
Mr. Hardy?
I'm okay with waiting for the data. Just a question on how long are we planning on collecting data, and when do you expect possibly that report?
So I think we actually pulled the counters up today. And
Okay.
so then we'll compile that data. We have to, we had to make sure our counter collectors are calibrated because we had some issues with them last year. So if the data comes back and it's all out of whack, then we have a separate set of counters that we would set out and collect that data all over again.
Okay. I'm okay with waiting for the collection of data to see where we're at as a preliminary thing, and then we can see if we need to move forward on something else.
Is that the consensus?
Yep.
Yes.
And bring it back?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to ask a question, Ms. Wiki. I call them the yellow flashing light. You call them RFFP, is that what it?
Rectangular rapid flashing beacon,
RRFB.
FB. Yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me. Is that the white flashing or the yellow
This is
flashing?
the yellow flashing.
That's the yellow
The
flashing,
one
okay.
that the pedestrian would trigger to,
Some of them are pedestrian actuated and others are, they can be set on a timer.
for certain times of the day, like
Yeah, like for school.
school traffic. Okay.
Sure.
I was kind of leading up to that. I've had a request on Union, and I understand Quail Ridge residents might be interested in installing one of those. If the DOT chose to put two of them in on Union when they redid the bike trail, and citizens see that, they ask for those types of devices for cross traffic.
Right.
And I know they're like 20, 25,000?
In that neighborhood, yeah.
Battery operated with the solar
Solar,
cell light,
sure.
charges them up. If your study says that it's not needed, can a neighborhood do a fundraiser and purchase it for themselves and have it installed by the city?
I believe that's something that the city would probably consider.
Okay. And Mr. Gaines, you're shaking your head no. Why would you not allow a citizen to put in their own traffic crosswalk?
I think you'd really need to look at it and look at the liability that's put on the city. If all of a sudden we're installing traffic control devices that aren't warranted, I think it really opens up the city to liability issues.
In what way? I mean, if there's morning traffic, bicycles, I mean, I hear this from the local residents that sit there and watch a whole troop of young kids going to the schools, crossing, and traffic doesn't seem to stop. I mean, there's a liability there, isn't there, that if somebody gets hit?
I don't want to get into hypotheticals, but what I would tell you is if we're putting in something that's not warranted as licensed engineers, we're open to some liability issues, not only for ourselves, but for the city.
So, Mr. Rogers, can you enlighten us a little bit more? Because there's other intersections, I don't want to get off topic, but such as Center Street, where there's concern with crossings.
Exactly, by the school.
Yeah.
So the city installs those devices based on standards. So if there are no standards, then the neighborhoods with the most money will be able to install all these traffic devices, and that leaves others without anything. So I think it would be best, both from a liability standpoint and a fairness standpoint, to apply standards across the board, across the city. And it doesn't depend how much money you can raise, because it's city infrastructure. If it's necessary, the city ought to install it and maintain it.
Thank you.
Okay, Chairman. Thank
Follow up, if I may.
Okay. Mr. Cruz?
Does the DOT use different standards when they chose to put those in on Union? Was it Whispering? I'm not sure the name of the streets down there, but,
Paddington.
no, further south. There's,
They're south and Paddington.
right near your place there.
Oh, the one that goes into Wild Horse there.
Yeah, there's two of them. I don't know, both of them have flashing capabilities, but the DOT chose to put them in under some standards, as Mr. Rogers is explaining. Do they have different standards than the cities would use? I'm curious.
I don't believe so.
Okay, I'd be curious how they determined that they were warranted there, personally. I don't know if we can,
I can look into that for you.
I'd appreciate that.
So, Mr. Ganfield?
Just say, I think it sounds like we had a consensus to wait for some data. In the meantime, Director Birdie, can we jump the list and get the speed radar out there at the start of the school year?
Absolutely, we can, but we do get those requests a lot. So
I know.
you're talking specifically 12th Street?
On 12th, yep, facing, I would say right in front of the residentials there, where it's 45.
One last comment.
Yeah.
Mr. Cruz?
This to Director Birdie. Traveling across the country recently, I saw what I would maybe say is the newest version of those speed signs that, they start flashing when you're over the posted. And then when you get so much higher, all of a sudden, it looks like siren lights are flashing at you. If that got my attention.
Were the lights going off?
Apparently over what it said I should. I mean, have you seen those? Is it something we could consider getting? Because they really catch your attention to slow down.
Yeah, well, I would say there's all kinds of, traffic speed, things that'll tell you to speed, battery mounted on signs, mounted on poles. So, the technology's out there. They all have a cost to them. So that really would kind of be back to the same conversation. Where they needed, where they required, where would they best serve.
Okay, let's finish this up with the consensus that we're going to wait for Mr. Wiki to bring us back his report. And it seems like it's probably within short order here and maybe look at next month.
2 to 4 weeks, depending on, providing we get a good set of data off these counters that we just pulled.
Okay. All right, we'll adjourn at that then.
All right, thank you.